All right. So what is this video going to be? It's going to be a bit of a weird one because I'm starting the recording. Uh, well, partially it's going to be weird because the dogs are barking right at the beginning, but mostly it's going to be weird because I'm going to start just sharing some thoughts myself, and then others might join. So this is maybe a lot of the people who watch this will already know that this is just something I'm doing. I'm going to do this every weekday. And if nobody shows up, I'll just share some thoughts on how the platform to Dialogos Discord is going, how the weekly events are going. And then if somebody shows up, I'll just try to wrap up my point and then actually engage in a dialogue, because that would, I mean, it always tends to be more fruitful, at least with the people in our community here. Yeah, and if nobody shows up, I'll just, I doubt I will be talking for the whole hour. Yeah, and I'll just probably be pausing in between points to sort of think about my point and then be ready to express it concisely. Another thing is, while I'm doing this, I think that it might be useful to see this as modeling the way that one can speak. So part of the skill of Dialogos is to listen in a certain way, of course, but the other part is to speak in a certain way. And while I think the listening part, getting that down is more effective, there's still also the skill to be built of how to speak in Dialogos. And now, if nobody shows up, it's obviously not the best testing ground. And yet I have found that this way of speaking applies not just in conversation, but also when I'm trying to put together a piece of content, especially something like this that I'm not going to edit later. And I want to make sure that it flows without being scripted, but without getting off track. And it is something I've been actively practicing. So I suppose if you're watching this, you could partially consume this as just, I'm trying to model what I've learned. Yeah, especially if nobody else shows up, I'll just be modeling how the way of speaking that I found a lot of success with. Again, whether it's in dialogue or just trying to produce content that's not scripted and yet not totally meandering. And I guess I'll just speak to that really quick. I'll just describe what it is I generally do there. And this actually comes from Jordan Peterson. If you watch his lectures, he always is actively exploring, especially later on when he gets very famous and is talking at like large auditoriums and stuff, like his biblical series, for example. He goes up there with a question in mind, and he explores in real time. And I think that explains a lot of why people love it so much in person, like at a live event, and also his videos. And so what he says, because he talks about this in one of his interviews, I don't remember which, he says that he imagines that he knows where he wants to get to. And I don't think that he means this quite like he wants to prove something, but he has sort of a more vague kind of direction. So if I could use the metaphor of physical navigation in a landscape, it's not like he has a definite picture in his mind of what the landscape will look like when he gets there, but he does have sort of a direction that he sort of keeps in mind, or maybe even a compass that gets him over the mountains as he navigates in real time the more immediate terrain. So that's one thing, just to keep the end point in mind. And then the other thing is he just tries to visualize having stones that he steps on to get there. And when I say that out loud, it seems quite simple, but I really have found a lot of usefulness in it. I don't even remember if it struck me that it would be so useful when I heard it, but I do know that it stuck in my head and it's really changed the way I speak. Yeah, and even in a dialogue, when you have something you want to say and you begin speaking, that is a mini monologue, because you expect not to be interrupted until you get to your until you sort of have found some resolution. And especially in these conversations, we can expect that people, for one thing, won't interrupt, and for another thing, will pay attention as much as they can, at least generally. And so this art of monologuing, therefore, is also useful in dialogue, because dialogue is made up of taking turns monologuing, essentially. Yeah. So anyway, that's the technique I generally employ. That's what I'm employing right now as I speak. And I think now I've reached the conclusion, the final point on that topic, on that point. Yeah, and now I'm going to pause and think about what I want to say next. Pause the recording, that is. Okay, so a question that's on my mind right now is why? So as I said recently in the Discord, I have a feeling like there's more cohesion in the group after this last Saturday. And David asked me why. Why do I feel like that? When he asked, I realized I didn't really have it's more of a hunch and a feeling than anything tangible. So I'd like to explore that question. And going back to this technique of speaking that I described just now. So in this instance, I don't actually have an answer in mind. I'm in fact fully aware that I don't know the answer yet. I just have these sort of feelings and gut, stuff going on. And I might be wrong as well. Maybe as I explore why I feel that way, I might realize it's not valid, or who knows what I'll find. But the point I'm trying to make is that I do have a question in mind, and finding some resolution of the question is that last point that I'm trying to get to, that I'm trying to put stones in front of me to reach. So, and I think that's important to note that, again, that final point doesn't need to be a conclusion, doesn't need to be an argument that you're trying to make. It can really just be like, I want to feel some resolution on this question, or another example would be, I want to express that I'm feeling confusion and explore that a little bit, or I want to try to mirror what someone else has said. So those are all very good goals in conversation. And the more you can keep them in mind, the more concise you can be. And I also want to say that if you can keep that goal in mind, the process of laying the stones out to get there kind of happens by itself. You don't really need to think much about it. I think that can sort of happen on autopilot in a good way. You can kind of play with it. It doesn't need to be, certainly shouldn't be a pre-planned exercise, at least for the kinds of conversations I want to have, which I think leads into dialogos. Okay. The question again is, why do I feel like there's more group cohesion now? So we've been doing this for 4 weeks. This is the 4th event we've done, I believe. And I'm gonna not stress too much about whether the first stones I put down are directly in line with the question. I'm gonna start by speaking what just comes up in my mind first. For example, the fact that we're 4 weeks in came up first. The next thing that comes up is, oh no, I forgot it. What was the next thing that came up? Let me re-ask the question to myself. I'm sorry if this is a bit silly to watch. Why do I feel like there's more group cohesion? Okay, the next thing that came up in my mind was the fact that our group started, I don't remember exactly, I think it was, I want to say like 30 to 40 people. And my memory is roughly that the next week there were a few less, and then the third week there were quite a bit less. I think there were 16 of us. And then this week there were 20 of us. So something about that, I don't know, that progression of numbers comes up when I think about this question. Why do I feel there's greater group cohesion? Part of that process of the shrinking, people who weren't excited enough about this to continue coming left, and then it's a bit of a gray area. Maybe some people just haven't shown up for a while. For example, Joe, he couldn't show up, I think, for the second and third event, but he showed up for the fourth one. So there could be a lot of that going on as well. But when we first started out, there was a lot of confusion about what we were doing. I don't think it could have been any other way. And it's almost like, they say that a lot of the learning that happens in a newborn's mind actually takes place by the mechanism of synapses dying off. So you have a newborn brain has like orders of magnitude more synapses between the neurons than a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. And part of the process of learning is just to lose the connections that don't get used. So if a baby starts, for example, associating mother's voice with mother, that will form connections in the synapses, which will use the synapses, so they'll stay and other ones will fall away. And that actually is part of what seems to be happening when we learn things, especially as newborns. And so that just came up for me because what has happened over the past 4 weeks is we've shrunk quite a bit. And the people who are not interested in what we're doing have left. And of course, that does bring up worries of cultishness. But that's a worry in my head. It doesn't actually feel like too much of a salient worry right now. In any case, that's one process that has happened. And I think we can point to that as a cause for some of the lack of confusion that we have. But I certainly don't think that's all of it. I also think that we've learned a lot. There is culture growing in the group. We are playing around with different formats, and specifically, the thing that comes up is the culture of the plenary. That has improved considerably. I mean, the first plenary we had, everybody was saying it was very draining. The plenaries that we have now, they're still not the level of rejuvenation I get from a good breakout room, a good smaller chat, but I wouldn't call it draining either. Yeah, it's more of a neutral. It sort of goes on by itself. I don't find myself, falling out of focus in the group. And I guess where I find myself going is that it all works a lot better. The whole process that we've been experimenting with works better. The breakout rooms are less of a gamble now. At least it feels that way to me. I'd be curious to hear what other people think, because I have focused on this skill of, let's say, gardening conversations to move them as close as I can to dialogos. But I suspect we all have the experience of the breakout rooms are less of a gamble now, and the plenary is better. So we've really gotten better at that. And yet I still feel like I haven't quite answered the question, why do I feel like there's more cohesion? Because what I've said is that we work better. That's good. But I feel like it's not just that we're getting better. It's that we know we're getting better, or rather that I think that we feel that we're getting better. Cohesion. I still feel like I haven't done that word justice. We've oiled the machine, we've re-engineered it in good ways, we've formed connections between people. Here's a way in which cohesion has definitely improved. When I go into a breakout room now, most of the time, a typical breakout room will be like, if it's 4 people, there will be 2 people I know, which by that I mean I've interacted with them directly, whether it's in a personal chat or in a breakout room. I would define that as interacting closely. And so 2 of the 3 others are in that class, and then one of the other ones, someone I haven't interacted closely with yet. Maybe it's someone who's been with us the whole time, but just now is, just the way the gamble of the breakout rooms goes. I haven't seen them yet, or just the last breakout room of the last event, it was someone who was new to the event. But my point is, when I go into a breakout room now, I feel much more at home, less nervous. I know what I'm going to get into. I understand, maybe I've learned that person A tends to be more quiet, person B tends to have a faster conversational tempo. And that doesn't even touch on the relationship that I have and the history of the relationship. For example, Willem and I, Willem, it's a tough name for me to pronounce. That W is ambiguous to me. Anyway, he and I very early on set a kind of emotional baseline to be Jordan Hall-esque here. So when he's in a group, I can like lean back against that, and I know that relationship. Not only do I know it, I know that he feels or knows it as well, and so that will be a theme in the conversation going forward. And that could be something like more emotional, like what I just described with Willem, or it could be something more intellectual. For example, Christian and we've talked a few times, and we've established that we share a lot of the same vocabulary with dialogos, and it feels to me we're very similarly oriented in our voracious appetite for working out dialogos and how to do it practically, what it means, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's the cohesion that I feel now. I think there's a little more than that too. I think that's most of it when I say I feel like there's more cohesion, but I think there's a little bit more to it too. And that is that when the group decides to talk about a topic, there's less of a question as to whether we decided it. There's less, it seems like we're all sort of in agreement that we're all sort of moving in the right direction. Of course, it's still not defined. I don't think any of us would be able to confidently say what the direction is, but it does feel like it's forming to me. You know, the first, it's like if I have this image in my head where the first time we did the event, it was like we were in the circle and the potential directions we could have gone were just all over the place. And then as we did this a couple more times, it's less of a circle and more of like a pear shape where we kind of are getting some sort of directionality. I really liked the topic of this last Saturday. It was a really nice sweet spot for me between there's this tension of we need to be action oriented or we need to focus on connections and not worry about action. And the topic of the breakdown of dialogue, I think fits really nicely in between those two, because it is something, if we come to insights, we can actually, let's say, disseminate these around us, and that would actually improve the world. And I also liked how it was a conversation that we could have about both ourselves, the group, and the outside world at the same time, because we are practicing, of course, how to have good conversation. So that like hint of a directionality is the other part of why I think why it seems that we have cohesion. Yeah, and there we go. So I've gotten to my final rock. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I've noticed also on that point that if you are asked a question or you ask yourself a question and something comes up in your head that doesn't seem related, it's typically a good idea to follow it, at least if you're in a good frame of mind. That would probably break down if you're in like a defensive frame of mind. But if you are in an open exploratory framework and you think, here's the question, and then something pops up that seems like it's going like over here, but it pops up anyway, and it's just the first thing in your head. Yeah, I found a lot of success in going in that direction, but keeping the question, and eventually I'm there almost like in this case anyway. I don't even know the exact journey. If I sat down and tried to retrace it, I probably could, or even better, if someone was listening to this, they could retrace it, and that would be fruitful indeed. Yeah. What's next? What's the next topic? Let me pause and consider. Okay, so I may have hit record as I burped. If that's true, I apologize. But moving on. So plans for this, for the next while, let's say after 4 weeks of data, I'm feeling like I'm at the point where we can make some higher level, more informed plans about how to move forward with this. One thing that's happening naturally, which I'm very happy about, is the initiative to create, for individuals to create their own events. So David, I think, was one of the leaders in this respect. He threw out an invitation for a weekly organic circling event. So that's actually going on tomorrow. I hope to join that. And then just recently, Willem opened up a channel in general called Being Mode, which is more about meditation and being present and things like that. that, so I'm going to say something that sounds maybe more pessimistic than I mean it. I like to say the worst case scenario as a way of framing how good things are going. So that's what I'm going to do here. Let's say that we never do a Saturday event again. You know, nobody wants to do another one, and we just abandon it for whatever reason, or you know, whatever for whatever reason it has to end. Even in that case, we've already done something here, and I think this is important to point out. We've all practiced conversation, first of all, and I'm going to say this, and I suspect many of you can say the same thing. This has already changed how I have conversations in the real world. I find myself using habits I've learned and practiced with all of you in the real world, and it makes my life better. And I suspect many of you have had the same experience. So that's the one way in which we've already done good in the world, at least in our own immediate lives, which isn't to be discounted, right? I think globally, act locally. Well, my conversational, the changes in my conversation is a change in my acting locally that makes my acting locally better. It makes a better positive impact, even if I can't go measure it or see the fruits necessarily. So where was I there? So let me pause and think about that. By the way, if I was in a conversation with somebody, it'd be a perfect opportunity for someone to jump in and point out what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought I was saying, what they were confused about. And one of the wonderful things about dialogue as opposed to monologue is that, okay, I'm monologuing here, I have no feedback. That means I have to actually keep track of what I'm saying, so I have to be speaking and listening sort of at the same time. If somebody else is there, and you can see this very clearly in the Dialogus videos with Jordan Hall and the foursome there of Chris and Guy and John Vervaeke. When one is speaking and you know that others are listening fully in this kind of meditative way, you can stop doing the job of listening, and you can go off on a wild tangent in a fully inspired mode, speaking your thoughts as they come, not really knowing where you're going or even remembering where you came from. You end sort of out of breath in this new place, and you're like, huh, and you don't even really know if it makes sense. But what you'll find is that you have other people around you doing the job of listening, putting everything you say into their head, seeing what it feels like, and then when they speak, there was no reason for you to be confused or lost if you felt that way at the end of your speech. So, and that's maybe just another way to look at dialogos. It's allowing one person to speak, to be fully present in thinking aloud and exploring, and everyone else to be fully present in witnessing it and, let's say, consuming the thought as fully as you can. So that's just a pretty cool thing that happens. Yeah. Yeah, and indeed, I actually can't remember what I was saying before I went off on that. Yeah, when I sort of lost my place there. So that's too bad, and it's a downside of monologues. And I think I'll end it here because I can't go and watch the video before I stop the Zoom recording, and so I think I'll end it here. I'll upload it to video, and if I left in the middle of something, just consider it a teaser for tomorrow because I'll see what I was saying and speak more to it. Oh, perfect timing. It's cool. Actually amazingly perfect timing. I think I literally just said the last sentence and I was about to hit stop recording. Like, because I was a monologue until you got here. And I was like, well, I'm done monologuing.
How about that?
That's pretty cool.
I'm jumping in while the tape is running already, huh?
Yeah, very nice. Cool.
Awesome.
Do you want to keep recording? Should we connect after recording? How do you feel about recording right away?
I don't mind recording right away, and okay. Although I reserve the right to change my mind,
of course,
at some point along the way. But yeah, that's cool.
Nice.
Looks like you're in a new location.
Well, or are you
using a virtual background?
that would be a pretty convincing one. I wonder how convincing they'll get. They might get really because you can obviously tell these days, but maybe they'll get really convincing one day. Anyway, No, I'm actually in so this is the place I first moved into a year ago in South Africa, and
Hmm.
I've moved sort of next door for a while, and then I was in Cape Town for a while with a really awful internet connection, and now I'm back to my, this is a smaller place, but it's more private, and I was living in the bigger place that's in the same property, but there's more people there. So this is, I'm really looking forward to actually just the solitude and privacy, and like there's a cleaning lady over there, and I, my stuff gets moved and I can't find it, and so it's just nice. This is going to be my
Yeah.
better a tiny kingdom than a larger commons. Well, I guess maybe both is good, but
That's a
I'm
really interesting. Yeah, I don't know that there's a universal principle to answer that
yeah,
one.
right. I think you're right. Yeah. Uh, all I can say is I'm definitely in the mood for a tiny kingdom these days. I've had a
Yeah,
lot of communal spaces in the past year, so I think that's why I'm liking the kingdom, tiny kingdom.
cool,
Yeah.
cool. So you had I think you were posting proposing a topic of what are we doing and what's the direction for this group?
Yeah.
Is that what you want to talk about?
Yeah. I'd love to. Um, and a bit of a rehash from what I just said, but I really feel like so the first session was like, I imagine it's like a circle with lots of different directions. We had no idea. Not only were there a lot of different directions, no one person could look at the conversation and say, oh, it's going to go this way. I mean, the best one could do is say, well, it might go in these 5 directions, but even that would be, you couldn't even say that with confidence. And so the feeling I've had from the second session, but especially as time is going on, is that it's not a circle, it's more of a pear shape, like there's a bit of a directionality to it. And I still wouldn't be able to put to words what that is, but it does feel like it's very much a feeling. It feels like we all are learning and developing more what that direction is, and it's converging. I guess that's the best word. That seems like a good word. It's converging. That's how it feels to me.
Hmm.
Do
Hmm.
you do you feel like that?
Yeah. It's. I'm not sure if I would automatically jump to the term converging. Um, Although I think it's as good as any. It's the sense of I'm not sure if there's an attractor. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly. It's the technical term of strange attractor or whatever. But I'm not sure if
Oh
there's
yeah.
I'm not sure where the center of gravity is. Um, well, that's kind of pulling us all together. And I think that's an interesting thing to explore. Um, a question that I have strongly in my mind for what we're doing here is whether um, to what extent it's just about getting together and having fun with conversations, which I feel personally is a very is a great thing to do.
Hmm.
I have no problem with that. I also see a possibility of us really focusing on learning a specific skill or employing a skill, developing our skill, if you will, at a in a particular model, which I think you've proposed with the framework of Dialogos and the platform, the converging multiple layers, sort of the what's the word, the tournament style
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
approach. Although it's collaborative tournament as opposed to competitive.
Yeah.
Which actually is a really interesting idea. And so in light, I feel like we've been making progress. We're kind of moving in that direction somewhat. And I would expect it to be a slow lurching towards that, given
Mm.
the diversity of people and backgrounds and the kind of somewhat random walk that we got to get to this point. So I'm not at all surprised
Hmm.
to by what's happening. I think it's a really cool experiment to see where it goes and see what's going to happen next.
Yeah. 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 So if I could just like sort of mirror that, um, I'm trying to model a lot of this stuff now. I started the video talking about how I was going to model some. So I'm just going to mirror what you said, because so you just went on a journey, and so I'm going to try to retrace the journey now, which I find really helpful in let's say pursuing dialogos. So yeah, so you heard what I said, and then you said you wouldn't jump to like convergence, the term converge, but you like expressed an interest in the center of gravity, and sort of you were also saying like you'd be hard pressed to like point to the center of gravity, and then let me think what you said next. Let's see. This thing happens to me in conversation where if I forget what I'm saying, I become really self-conscious of forgetting what I'm saying, and then I lose my ability to remember completely. It's
Right.
really weird. I
Yeah.
hope I drop that someday, but it's been with me for a long time. Anyway, um,
I,
oh yeah, so you brought up, and I might be missing some points in here, but then you got to bringing up sort of this tournament style thing, which uh, and then you sort of said it seems like we're moving in that direction of um, maybe not specifically that direction, but that direction sort of near there, and you're not surprised that it's like a more of a stumbling and lurching um, process. And that
yeah.
reminded me then of, by the way, if you're still, let's say, practicing the skills, I could stop now and say, did I get that right? But I think just from you saying, yeah, I can sort of, and then I would like to keep going and maybe add something to it. Okay. And what I'm adding is, it reminded me of something. It reminded me of last Saturday, where I think his name was Michael. I really like the way he puts ideas into words. He said, he brought up this point in our breakout room, and then I asked him again in the plenary to bring it out, where we are trying something. Well, part of the idea was we're trying something so novel, we can't go in and lock in anything. We have to go in and not know any rules about what we're doing, because if we try to lock in a rule, we might be bringing in part of the problem we're trying to solve, which is generally like something about how to have a certain kind of conversation. And so he also said, like, we have to, of course we would be stumbling, and he said it's a feature, not a bug. And then I responded to that and I said, yeah, it's like play. We have to take a beginner's mind to it. Something about connecting that idea just now gave me goosebumps, by the way. But even though I've expressed it before, which is surprising to me that I would get goosebumps again. Anyway, yeah, I think it's not surprising that we don't know how to do it and that we're kind of stumbling. Um, and maybe it's not surprising that it's fun, because it is play, you know?
Mhm.
So, I mean, if we keep having fun, that's actually a pretty good indication that we're learning. Um, that's how I feel about children. If they're having fun, they're generally learning about something. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, and I don't feel nervous at all about not being actionable enough. I don't know if others do still. I think Barney has that worry a little bit. Um, and I don't know to what extent that's like shared in the group, but I'm comfortable continuing to play. Um, although David K did point out, very helpfully, that it's also good to have like a medium term direction. So that's actually helped me think more about where it's going, and that's why I'm speaking more about dialogos in the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a bit of meander there, but
Yeah. I have a few comments I want to make. That, uh, number one, I was experiencing the meander also, and as you were starting to reflect back on what I said, um, uh, it was almost with some embarrassment, right? For me, that I thought my thoughts were a little scattered, and then I realized, actually, one of the challenges that we're faced with within communication is the fact that we have to serialize
yeah,
what we're doing. As you know, software developer to software developer, but
yeah.
for people, it's um,
We have to
our
put in
intuition.
a distinct order, just for anyone who isn't familiar with the term. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So our intuition has got multiple channels running all at once, and I'm seeing, I, I think spatially. I tend to think spatially. I see relationships between things spatially very easily, um, and of course, intuitively, I see a snapshot. Thinking fast and slow, Danny Kahneman stuff of getting a quick snapshot from multiple channels, but how to take all of that and to serialize it for, the words coming out of my mouth, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
It- and but that's what we have, and what we have to work with. So our meanders, I think both yours and mine in this conversation so far, are a matter of laying out different pieces of things that we're seeing that are salient, and there's not one right way to walk through them in serial fashion.
Right.
And somehow we have to take all of them and go forward. So this meandering process, again, is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
Yeah.
uh, and have some self-consciousness about it with the thought of being recorded.
Yeah.
But feature, not a bug. We just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree. I,
so
I, I find a certain sacredness in the meandering more and more. Like I don't worry about it. I trust it, and it leads me to good places.
yeah, yeah. The second thing that about that is, um, I get very impatient watching other people meander over territory that I'm familiar with. Um,
Hmm.
and so I am self-conscious about asking other people to extend their patience for me,
Right.
uh, or thinking about recording and making an artifact out of our meanderings.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if we're going to make an artifact, if I'm working on an artifact, I'd like it to be something that where I've given a lot of thought. I've probably had several iterations on the serialization process. And so I'm coming up with a very effective serialization to take somebody on the right journey, to something insightful, rather
Yeah.
than bringing them along in the whole process.
Right. Right.
And did I lose you? You seem
I
to have frozen.
I heard everything you said. Your video is frozen. So I think the
Oh,
recording
now
will.
you're active again.
Okay.
Did we cut out for a moment?
I heard everything you said. The video seemed to
Okay.
stop working, and there might be some lag now. Can you hear me right
Okay.
now?
Okay. Yeah, I can.
Okay.
So that's good.
Okay.
Um, okay, so there's that. And then the one other feature of the landscape that I wanted to pull in is in terms of this skill building and meandering process, and essentially what it seems like what we're doing is group meandering at this
Hmm.
point in with this whole group.
Which gets
Um,
back to play a bit.
like Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple of different kinds of play. And there's sort of goal-oriented or provisional goal-oriented play, like soccer,
Hmm.
football
Hmm.
is tremendously fun, and it's way more fun than just a bunch of guys running around, people running around in a field with the ball,
Right.
because there's specific, highly artificial frameworks that you put in place for the purpose of the game.
Hmm.
And I feel like to some extent we've been doing that with having the framework of, let's talk about culture wars, or talking about race,
Yeah.
right? And I think it would be interesting to experiment with even more tight frameworks,
Hmm.
as well as, I like the framework so far have been pretty broad in general. And I don't think they have put a whole lot of, I don't think we've bumped into constraints on the
Hmm.
play
Hmm.
came came about because of the frameworks we put into place. And I'm suspicious. I'm formulating this hypothesis right now that a good approach would be to gradually narrow the boundaries of the framework until we find ourselves bumping into them with a certain amount of regularity. We want to have guidance, but not injury,
Hmm.
as we hit the boundaries.
Hmm.
And that may be a way a model to use to think about how do we bring more structure in, if we want
Yeah.
to bring more structure in
Right.
on this process.
Right. It's interesting when you started speaking. My mind went in an opposite direction, and I was thinking, what if we took out the boundaries completely and went with a different kind of play? So it's funny just that I went in that direction.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I guess I must have some bias towards that direction because as you speak, I somehow seem to naturally be thinking of the problems or the obstacles. So I don't know why I think that, but in any case, that's just to speak to them, the ones that popped up. The one more of an obstacle to achieving that is, how do we decide on, because I think the difficulty will be greater to actually decide on the sidelines. I'm imagining sidelines, by the way, when you were speaking about narrowing the constraints. I'm imagining like the sidelines of a football field. Anyway, how do we, if we want to narrow the sidelines, that's actually going to be a more difficult process to get a coherent answer that the group feels like the group decided on. Right now, we seem to be effective, and when I say we, I think Ariel takes up about 70% of this we, in a good way. You know, we decide what the prompt is. At least last week it was all her, and as well as next week, she really she has been proposing these prompts. I suspect and hope that she's happy doing that. So, and she seems good at it as well. In any case, that's still a process. The group can say we made that decision because she is honestly consulting the group in that process. And so to narrow the sidelines, yeah, I have a hunch it would be more difficult in that way. But that doesn't speak at all to whether it would be good or bad. That just means it's just something we'd have to take into consideration. And just on that topic, so the other thing that came up was, yeah, so like if we look at the opposite, if we look at taking out some guidelines, I was thinking recently about, what if we had no prompt and we just like threw people into breakout rooms and like, I don't know, guys, you figure it out. That would be the easiest prompt to develop, and we could do it every week. I mean, we could, whether or not it would be helpful, but we could certainly do that every week with no effort. But I'm just now thinking, because our third event was more like that. Or wait, let me think about this. There was one event. Have we done 3 or 4? Now I'm not sure, because we had the race discussion, which is very difficult, but surprisingly smooth discussion, but still a lot of energy. And then we had an event after that
So
where the
your
focus
voice
was.
has gotten very robotic and your screen is frozen.
The
The image is frozen.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I noticed that when we had the discussion, that was like, we were going to say, okay, we're just going to have fun and try to rejuvenate. You know, we're not going to have much of a goal. I noticed that after that event, I was the least excited about the next Saturday. So that would almost, I wonder, and I did have this hunch that it was connected to like the lack of a direction, or the lack of goalposts, I suppose, to use our terminology we're forming here. And now that you've brought this up and you've pointed this out, I have an even stronger suspicion that we were running around a yard with footballs.
Bandwidth is low, screen frozen.
How is it now? Could you hear what I said? Should I repeat something?
Yeah. Let me see what I got. So I honestly, you know, probably heard 10% of your words.
Oh no.
So the things I heard were, you know, for you, a personal impulse towards less structure, not more, and desire to go that way. And then you're thinking about, because you're going that way, you're thinking about, well, what would be obstacles or problems with that? And you brought up the observation that we've tried a few different things, and in particular, one meeting, maybe it was 2 meetings ago, that we had less structure. I think I heard you say that you felt lower energy and maybe some discouragement, or just lack of enthusiasm, most of all after that session,
Exactly.
rather than the ones with more structure.
Exactly.
And I'm not intuitively that makes complete sense to me. And my intuition again is that a good way forward would be for somebody to say, well, as in some ways what you've done is you've held up a flag and said, hey, I want to do this.
Mm.
Anybody who wants to do this, gather around over here. Let's do
Right.
this.
Right.
And I personally think that approach works really well because I think people get energized by having some idea, even if it's a um, you know even if it's all a game, even if we're sitting around to play cards or do whatever it is. I'm looking for a simple analogy, but it's going for a hike. It's more fun to hike somewhere
Yeah.
than to just go for a walk
Right.
somewhere. So
Right.
I think there's something natural about that.
Mm.
I think also that over and above that sort of natural magnetizing focus, magnetizing awareness
Mm.
quality that happens from having a goal, I think a lot of us are coming with um, goals already in place. I mean, we found rebel wisdom and we're attracted to it
Yeah.
because I think of perception of the world could be better,
Hmm.
um, and and there's things we'd like to do to we want to work with like-minded people to see about influencing the direction of the world
Right.
in a way that we think is better. um, and so for a lot of us, the ability to um, be more productive in our dialogues is a skill that is valuable. Not It's valuable as a tool in pursuit of bigger ends, right? um, as well as maybe somehow being the end in itself, right?
Hmm.
The ability for humans to resonate with each other and get on the same page.
Hmm.
I think you can make a strong case that it is the one thing that we all need to do. It is the end goal, so to speak, if
Right.
you want to put goals.
Right.
um, and it is intrinsically, it's autotelic, to use the term from the original flow researchers. It contains its own rewards,
Mm.
like hiking to the top of a mountain or
Right.
playing a soccer game.
Right.
Um, so again, that's a bit of a meander, but again, the meandering around the point that I think there's a lot of value in one person holding up the flag and saying, "Hey, let's do this."
Yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
part of what's been so lovely lately, especially, is people start more and more doing this with their own flags. Actually, David is doing an organic circling event, um,
yep,
and then just recently Willem has the new channel that he started, and oh, and then you have this piece of writing which I still want to. I've read it. I want to go through and comment now. It's on my list.
awesome.
So all these are wonderful. Yeah, I I should probably go like pretty much now because I do have another call at just in 4 or 5 minutes. But
Cool.
is there anything else that you want to like, any hanging thoughts or any other things you noticed that you want to? Because I do still have 5 minutes. I just don't want to have to cut us off midpoint.
Yep. Well, there was one other thing that flashed in my mind. The Oh yeah. Uh, Further to the idea of one person holding up the flag and saying, "Let's do this." Um, cer- it's interesting, but uh, my observation is the surest way to kill the energy is to look around, to say to everybody, "Hey, what do we all want to do here?"
Mm,
And try and develop a consensus.
mm,
Less and my hypothesis about this is that it really comes back to the problem of serialization and communication. That probably a lot of us have intuitions that are relatively close about what we'd like to do,
mm-hmm,
um, but getting everybody's separate articulation of them,
mm,
and
mm,
we end up in endless discussions of the nuances rather than letting one or two people sort of take on the role of handling the mundane issues at some level, right?
yeah,
There's sort of like there's a lot of things that we can handle with heuristics that just aren't that important of a decision for 90% of us.
yeah,
Somebody just decides it and we go there.
yeah,
Then we can all get onto the stuff that we like,
right,
uh, and the energy builds.
mm-hmm, right. I just want to reflect a particular part of that. You were saying that. we all, even on the assumption, which I think is a fair assumption by this point, that we all share intuitions about where we want to go, that doesn't mean that it's simple to actually turn that into an action. Um, you just we can't just do that. I mean, we could potentially, and one of the things that came up for me is like, well, in some sense we are actually trying. That's sort of what we're wondering, if we can do it. In some sense we're wondering, actually, can we take all these intuitions and things, and without discarding nuance, actually get to something, some direction. But we aren't there yet, which is an interesting place to be at. And so given that we're not there yet, the more people can put down flags, and say, look, my intuition, really my whole brain says we're going to go here. And as long as people sort of feel, oh yeah, that feels good, that feels like that's the direction I wanted to go, you don't need to unify all of these nuanced positions. All you have to do is put a flag down that they all kind of align with, and that's just a yes or no. And they go, oh yeah, I align with that.
Yeah.
And actually, what I really like is that this actually brings me now to a pretty actionable idea, which is to say, we could pretty quickly, maybe not for this meeting, but every meeting after, we could just open up the process of deciding a prompt, and at least for the members who've been here a while, say, anybody can suggest a prompt, and we could, similar to the speakers list, we could have a list of people who suggest prompts. And I mean, I think by this point, there's enough trust in the group and understanding of what the culture is, that at least if it's, let's say, a veteran member and they have a suggestion, let's try it. Worst case, we learn why it was not a good suggestion, and so, yeah, that's something we could do.
Yeah. And, it's an iterative process. I'm taking in the baseline assumption that the worst the failure is good.
Yeah,
Fast failure is great.
right.
But feature not a bug, and as David was saying, or Michael was saying. I love the idea of appointing somebody, maybe some kind of random, take a D20 or something,
Ooh, I
and
like that. That
um,
sounds fun.
say okay, it's number 3, so 1, 2, 3, there's the
Dude.
person in the Zoom window. What do you want to talk about? That's what we're all going to talk about for the
Hell
next
yeah.
hour.
I love it. And I think the fact that you already have a D20 just ordains you as the ceremonial D20 roller. I'm actually pretty convinced we should do that. Of course, I'll see what
Cool.
Ariel thinks, but I like that idea a lot, actually. Of course,
Well,
you can always
we
pass if you want. I don't want to say it, maybe, but
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. People could pass, and we could suggest people to think of something beforehand.
Yeah, that's a good
Just
idea.
just
Hmm.
come prepared with 1 or 2 topics,
Yeah.
because your number might come up.
Yeah. I love it. That sounds fun too, which is good.
Yeah,
Cool. This has been great. Another thing I'll just say for like the whole modeling dialogos thing, a good hallmark of dialogos or approaching dialogos. I'm always hesitant to say when something is or isn't dialogos. I think maybe it's more of a target than a state,
yeah,
which is maybe an important point to make. But a hallmark of getting closer is that the things you speak about have more and more connections to the things you spoke about before. So we had all these recurring themes of playing, meandering, and we were meandering in our own speech, and they kept reappearing in new guises, which is just really fun. Which
yeah,
again,
yeah,
back to fun.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Sweet.
Okay, thank
It
you so
looks like,
much.
yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna love how perfect your timing was when you joined the call. It's just amazing. All
Awesome.
right. Okay,
All
cool.
right. Thanks, Logan.
Okay, thanks.
Pleasure chatting.
Yeah,
Take care.
definitely. Bye.
See ya.